Welcome to this episode, everyone. I am actually really excited to be sharing this topic with you today. I think it's extremely timely and it's not going away anytime soon. And I think that it's just an ongoing discovery of how we can empower ourselves to reclaim our mental health. So our topic today is reclaiming our mental and emotional health, both for adults and our children. And I really, really hope that you find some empowerment within the words. And we're just going to keep going with this topic because it's a true passion of mine. And I just want to see people feeling more empowered, more like happier, more balanced, motivated, and just tackling life. So I really hope that you enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Family Health Revolution podcast with Coach Carla Atherton, where she discovers, uncovers, explores, and reveals the secrets to true family health and wellness.
All right, so welcome to this episode of the Family Health Revolution podcast. And I just finished recording, or I thought I recorded this very episode, and I wasn't even recording. So we're going to do this take two, now recording, of reclaiming our mental health, both adults and our children. And this episode is actually going to be sort of like a really broad overview, because each of these topics I'm going to touch on today can actually be greatly expanded into actually an episode for each one, which we will be doing. But I wanted to give a really good umbrella view of how I see mental health and emotional health, and how I help adults and children of all people of all ages to overcome mental health issues. And one of those things is that, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat today, is really how I had to reconsider and examine and come up with something quite different than the conventional understanding of the psychology discipline, right? So when I was in high school, I thought I wanted to be a psychologist when I grew up, right? So when I got out of high school, I actually enrolled in university in the psychology on the track to become a psychologist. So what you do at that point to become a psychologist was to take a degree in psychology. And so I sort of put, this whole field of mental and emotional wellness and mental health into this category of psychology as a discipline. And so, I still love to study and read about, all of these different concepts and ideas and teachings, but that has expanded exponentially from what I started off doing. So at first I thought I wanted to help people, and which I still do. But I thought the way to doing that was to get a psychology degree and actually study in the way that we were being taught. So it was more along the lines of categorizing people. There was a lot of diagnosing and pathologizing mental and emotional discomfort. And now I know that mental and emotional discomfort isn't always a pathology, and actually oftentimes it isn't. One thing, it is often a set of symptoms that is pointing us toward a deeper issue. And so when we want to look at symptoms and we want to say, what's wrong with me? That's a very natural thing to want to explore. Because it tells us we're not alone. It tells us that there's a reason for how we're feeling. It makes us feel less afraid, less, when we kind of feel like we understand something a little bit better, that unknown is actually diminished, right? We know. And people are very uncomfortable with the unknown. But, after learning so much more and with my own experience and experience with, clients and experience in just life, right? Because we all live life, and experience in my studies for sure too. I know that that is a very tiny, tiny piece of what actually mental and emotional health truly are. This whole, categorizing and pathologizing. And like I said, I don't pathologize mental and emotional struggle. Sometimes, okay, so first thing, sometimes it's a symptom. There's a set of symptoms pointing us to a deeper issue. Sometimes it's actually a natural progression through life. So there may be some things that, need to be looked at. And again, this sort of is along the same lines as deeper symptoms. But also, sometimes it's almost like not a rite of passage. That's not really the right words that I want to say. But it's sort of like where you go through something. It's almost like, if you have something that you can't really accept, let's say that, and you become really depressed about it, and you rant or you become angry, you rant and you rave about it. Next day you feel a little better. The next day you've accepted or changed it. It's usually one of the two, right? It's like, okay, this has changed. How am I going to adapt? Or I don't want this to change. I'm actually going to change how I am or how I feel about it. Or I want to change that actual thing that's happening to me. So I think that, mental and emotional struggle are not something that we need to, I guess, medicate. And so sometimes that is, or to dampen or to suppress or to quiet. Sometimes we need to feel that, and that's okay. It's not a medical emergency. It's not something that we need to, dampen and quiet. And sometimes we need to turn up the volume a little bit, or at least acknowledge it. And then that way there's a more of a moving through those emotions rather than walling them off. And then, because they will just keep cropping up over and over again. So we know this in functional medicine. When there's a symptom, that's pointing us to a root cause, and when we address that root cause, we actually alleviate the symptom and then prevent any further issues in the future, right? So this is another thing we want to do. Address it so we can move on in life and grow and expand and do something different, right? All right, so those are a couple things that I wanted to say about, the psychology as a discipline. And I'll tell you a little bit more in just a second about what more I've learned about psychology as a discipline in just a moment. But I think that generally speaking, the new view, and actually there's such an explosion in this whole department of mental and emotional and health and psychology, it's just exploding now in some really brilliant circles. And that is moving toward more of an energetic understanding of how we feel, of our emotional body, of our mental state, how our thoughts actually become things, how we affect our our physical health with our mental state and the thoughts we have, and vice versa. It's more eclectic, it's more holistic in mind, body, spirit, and even quantum. And I'm going to just plant that quantum word as a seed just for now, because we won't have time to go into any quantum stuff in this episode, but just keep that in mind. And so what I want to do and what I do with clients is we try to move toward power and empowering ourselves, in that no one is relegated to being under labels and diagnoses. So as I always tell anybody who will listen, a diagnosis is never the end. It's actually the beginning. So when we say, I've been diagnosed with bipolar and I've got to take this medication for the rest of my life, and I'm just that way and I'll never, be able to get a hold of it or handle of it, but I'll just, learn ways to cope and manage. No, actually, I see that diagnosis is not the end, but the beginning of discovery, and whether that be the discovery of a physical cause of your mental and emotional struggles, which we're going to get to in a second, because there can be physical causes for that, or whether it be a mental cause or an emotional cause, or actually that's it, environmental, actually too, that's another one. We need to go deeper, and then that way we can get to really a true healing, a true rebalancing. And sometimes we need to kind of rebalance again and recalibrate, and don't have a good day, or you feel like you've taken a step back, but always 2 steps forward, always 2 steps forward. So again, really allowing those diagnoses to melt away and know that it is not a life sentence. And so another reason for doing that and trying to make sense of our situation, maybe by using words that can label and diagnose, but moving away from that diagnosis becoming part of our identity. So a diagnosis, and let's just take away the mystery, take away the power of a diagnosis and see it for what it is. It is a set of symptoms we call something. Okay? So we've just clustered all of these symptoms and say, well, that's what this is called. But really what we're wanting to pay attention to are the individual symptoms and understanding what those symptoms are trying to tell us, and then go deeper to those root causes. A diagnosis is not a set and determined state of being. And it never is. Very, very rarely when we can look at root causes and resolve them. And so what do I mean by that? So how do we look at root causes, and what are the categories that we might be looking at when we have, when we're looking at mental health as a whole? Well, we want to address the mind and the psyche, which I kind of touched on, and that's a little bit more understandable in this conventional understanding of mental health and emotional health. But we can go even further, and like I was saying just a couple of minutes ago, is understanding how the mind and the psyche works. Yes, okay. And then we can kind of be very clear about, okay, my mind's kind of playing tricks on me, or this thought isn't really mine. I heard that from somewhere and I just keep replaying it in my head. Is that true? And I'm always asking, is that true? Is that true? Because a lot of times our thoughts are not true. People don't like me. That person glared at me because, we're not friends. There's all kinds of things that we think on a day-to-day basis that actually highly affect our mental and emotional state. But a lot of those aren't true. And sometimes when they are true, it doesn't really apply to us, or it doesn't matter in the whole scheme of things. So taking that conventional, look at the mind and the psyche, and actually expanding that to a more eclectic view of how the mind affects the body and the body affects the mind, and looking at the psyche as something that is part and parcel, yes, to our whole emotional state and mental state, but only part. So I'm going to go to a couple of the other parts. Okay, so also the body and the spirit. Okay, so with the body and the spirit and the mind, obviously we're looking for root cause resolution in all areas. But if we're looking at body, for instance, there are so many things that affect our mental and emotional state that have to do with reactivity, reducing inflammation, and an inflammatory response in the body and the nervous system. So what we're looking at here that's really interesting in this whole discipline and this whole understanding is that if we're inflamed in our bodies, if our bodies are unwell and unhealthy, if we have unhealthy habits, we actually create a state of mental and emotional dis-ease. So another thing is that we want to be addressing trauma, and actually, through my whole life, actually, I've been very interested in trauma and trauma studies. But now, especially in the last couple of years, it's just grown exponentially for me. And I have been doing a ton of research and working a lot with families who have, where trauma is part of their history that kind of keeps trying to be part of their future. and they're present. And we don't want that. Trauma is something, created from an event that happened in the past. And so to relive that past is actually only serving us if the fear that it creates keeps us from a future danger. But the problem is that traumas are often not applicable to our future and actually keep us stuck in the past that is actually not happening to us anymore. So when we're addressing trauma, we actually can release our minds and our emotional state from being controlled by something that happened before. And then we can appropriately respond to things that are happening now. Another issue or category is the nervous system. And so that can be informed by trauma, right? The trauma, and those traumas don't even have to be big. It could be falling off your bike as a child and mom and dad not knowing and feeling abandoned. And nobody planned that. Nobody did something terrible. Nobody even would consider that could become a trauma for that child. But it can be. And the trick to move through trauma is to be able to have the skills and the tools to do that. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. So nervous system is another player in this whole dance of mental and emotional wellness. And if it's in a hyper-reactive or a stimulated state, such as the sympathetic nervous system, where we are in fight or flight, that works only when we need to flee or if we are in danger. It doesn't work at all when you're in a chronic state of stress. It's actually catabolic in that it tears down the body and creates all kinds of imbalance, dis-ease, endocrine and immune dysfunction, as well as those neurochemicals that are meant to keep our mental health steady and balanced. So if we're in parasympathetic state, then we are pretty good. We're in, rest and digest. We're able to think. We're able to respond, not react. So we're responding appropriately. So that's another system of the body that needs to be addressed when we think about balancing mental and emotional health. The other two are the immune system and the endocrine system. And I'm going to talk about those individually in future episodes as well. So the immune system is what kicks in and causes inflammation in the areas that, is seeing the kind of collateral damage, I suppose. And so when that's going on, we can actually have issues too with our mental emotional state. Because we can be in a hyper-reactive state at times when we're facing dangers or think we are. And the endocrine system is pumping out specific hormones that's telling the body what to do and essentially sort of how to feel. All right, so what are these new frontiers in rebalancing? And I want to use the word rebalancing. I think we all need to think of mental health and sorting through life's challenges, as well as those huge emotions like anxiety, depression, rage, anger, apathy, lethargy, lack of motivation. Both of those categories of extremes, I guess, being hyper stimulated as well as understimulated. And what I want to do is stick with the thought about rebalancing and move away from terms like treatment as if it's pathologized, right? Or rehabilitation as if people are impaired or dysfunctional as a person. And nobody who, I wouldn't even say suffer, I would say experiences feelings of dis-ease, right? Nobody's dysfunctional or impaired at all. Just maybe a little off balance. So we rehabilitate the system, we rebalance, not the person. We rehabilitate the system, not the person. All right. So another new frontier idea is actually addressing the physical body. So lifestyle and nutrition, huge. Huge, 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 huge. So we might think, okay, well, what does that matter what I'm eating? I mean, I've got depression, I need a medication. This is just it's a disease. It's something that I can't do anything about. Not so. That is not so. And we're going to talk about epigenetics in another episode. But what we do know, actually, for a fact right now, is that we can actually change the expression of our very genes by the inputs that we have, what we take into our bodies by way of nutrition and exposures, and what we surround ourselves in our environment as well. So lifestyle factors, what are those? So I already mentioned nutrition and diet, but that's huge. Even if you have a reactivity or an allergy that you didn't even know about to a specific food, if you're eating poor foods or bags, boxes, and cans, dead food, I call it, highly laden with chemicals, or really high in sugar or with a high glycemic index that's going to create all kinds of blood sugar issues and inflammation in the body, that will actually translate to the brain as well. Leaky gut dysbiosis, all of those things impact your mental health. And lifestyle factors such as sleep, exercise, I mean, those two things, if you don't get either one of those things, and sleep for sure at the right time of day, you're not detoxifying, and the oxygenation you get when you exercise is actually extremely beneficial for brain health. So we're not just looking at the way what we think and how we see the world and what lens we see the world through. We're actually oxygenating the very organs that allow us to have this experience of life. So if we're feeling like deprived of nutrients, if we don't have the right minerals, that our bodies are not going to function optimally. And we're going to go into that stuff a lot more in detail in the months to come as well. Infection can also, stimulate the immune system, causing inflammation in certain parts of the body and sometimes even the brain. EMF exposure can also be a huge issue with mental health. And actually, I'm seeing this as one of the front runners for causal factors of mental health issues in all of our population, but especially our youth. I'm seeing that's electromagnetic field exposure. So we're seeing that with kiddos that are up late at night on their phones. And it's not just the social media, although that is a huge issue, but it's not just the social media and the content. It's also the exposure to the electromagnetic fields that are inherently inflammatory to the body and brain. And we know that, mental health issues and emotional health issues are actually, that's part of the picture is inflammation. And also it disrupts the sleep patterns, and sleep patterns are essential for feeling mentally well. If you've just had one night of poor sleep, you know what that feels like. And so just translate that to chronic states of lack of sleep, of, disrupted sleep, and, not able to detoxify the brain throughout the night or rest or repair, rejuvenate, regenerate. That is exceptionally important to have any sort of, state of well-being. So I'm going to be talking about EMF exposure in another episode in more detail as well. So other factors that I can call I call the usual suspects, and again, another episode where we're going to unpack all those usual suspects. But what I want to leave you with today is a really good overview of the true holistic approach. And so when we have a true holistic approach to our mental health, that's when we take strides to becoming really 100% mentally stable, happy, and well. And so some of those tools to get us there, and I'll just leave you with a couple of my favorites, would be meditation and mindfulness. That's actually the front runner. I actually think that every child should learn how to meditate and be mindful and practice gratitude, whether it's from their parents, which is ideal in their family home. And I think, if kids are going to school, that should be literally one of the things they learn at school. It's like it's more important than math. It's more important than reading. Honestly, meditation, mindfulness, gratitude actually will put us into a state of control over our own mental and emotional health. It takes the control away from the emotion, away from the reactivity, and allows us to respond. It actually biochemically changes our levels of neurotransmitters, of hormones, as well as it actually increases the length of the telomeres at the end of our DNA caps. So literally protects our genes. And actually, when we meditate and are mindful and have those daily practices, we have tools, right? So a lot of people don't, and they're, especially our youth, they don't have the tools to actually help them through the tough stuff in life. And there's going to be tough stuff in life. And so instead of reaching for something to numb it, to stop the symptoms, we are looking for something that can help them to ride through it and come out the other side with more growth and more control and a sense of empowerment from that experience. So we're also addressing thoughts and mindset, which I touched on at the beginning of this episode. And we're looking at the physical and energetic environment around us. What do we surround ourselves with? Are our homes full of, pictures and windows and natural light and, natural smells and or do we have, a whole plethora of chemicals that are sprayed into our environment that can be inflammatory and cause reactive and allergic reactions? Are we, fighting in our home? Are we each, bringing our cell phones to the dinner table and not engaging or connecting with each other? There's so many different things that we can do to improve our environments, both physical and energetic. And again, I'm going to go through a document that I created that helps people to kind of identify ways to improve and to increase their family vibration at home. So we'll do that in another episode as well. So another thing I just want to mention before we wrap up is that there is actually a whole another deeper level to this this whole topic. And that's trauma healing, right? That I started to touch on earlier, but also quantum healing, inner child work, and ascension work. And we'll be going further into that in a future episode. But for now, really addressing our lifestyle factors, what you can do for yourself if you have any sort of mental, emotional distress, for your children, for your elders, anybody in your family that has these, struggles, because we all struggle. There is a true holistic approach that can actually get you to feeling pretty good most of the time. That's my thing. I think that wellness is feeling pretty darn good most of the time. And we've got our ups and we've got our downs, but they're not huge. And the downs are very much fewer and further between. All right, so I think that's all I'm going to say today. We've already hit the 27-minute mark, and I don't like to go past a half an hour to respect your time and mine. So thanks for being with me, and we're going to keep going with this topic again and again with, highlighting different details throughout. So I really hope you you join me for future episodes on this topic. All right, so this podcast is sponsored by the Healthy Family Formula, which essentially means that we share our information for free. All we ask is that before you move on to the next 100 things on your to-do list for today, take what you learn and instead of waiting until Monday, January 1st, or any other arbitrary date in the future, act on it now. Buy that new food, start that new routine, shift into that healthier habit. The little steps steadily move you past the miles you leave behind you. For information about anything related to family health, do pick up my book and check out our newsletter, blog, individual and group coaching programs, and practitioner training program at healthyfamilyformula.com. And you can also like our Facebook page, facebook.com/healthyfamilyformula. And also, if you've managed to listen to this whole little blurb at the end, I forgot to mention that I also lead de-stress sessions, like DE-stress. So we're taking away the stress, teaching youth how to, like, the skills and some tools and some teachings about mental health and rebalancing and reclaiming their mental health. So so check out healthyfamilyformula.com or the Facebook group, or wherever you can find me to find out about those sessions. All right, so thank you for listening, and it was a pleasure to spend this time with you today. Just a pleasure. May you and your family be well. Please note that Family Health Revolution podcast is not a source for diagnosis or medical treatment, but is the opinion of the host. This podcast is intended to empower people with information so they can make the best health decisions for themselves. It is up to each person to listen to their inner wisdom, consider the information they deem to be accurate and applicable to their individual situation, and consult with their trusted healthcare providers, if they so choose, when making any decisions regarding their own health or the health of their loved ones. Each person's health is their own responsibility.